This is Gemara Baba Kama Daf Ayin Dalid. We're holding on the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amid Beis on the last line. Amar Abaye, as Abaye is about to argue on the Raya of Rava. Just to remind ourselves of the Raya of Rava, Rava learned in the middle of the Amid, Eidim Sha'ochashu L'Bsayv Hozmu are Neheragin. What does that mean? What that means is, if that Eidim were contradicted and then subsequently found to be Zaymimin, they receive the punishment for the Hazama. So if there was a death that they were trying to cause, Mashikasha Asa, what they were trying to do, we give to them. So Rava learns that why? Because the fact that they originally contradicted does not make us completely disregard their eidos. It's considered the beginning of the process, and if subsequently they're found to be Hazama, then they get the punishment for Hazama. Rava proves this by explaining that the complicated brisa of giving eidos that a master blinded an eved or knocked out a tooth, there were three groups of eidim. Rava explained. Group A contradicted Group B, and because the second group contradicted the first group, therefore, when the third group comes in and makes them into Eidim Zaymimin, it's not pshat that the first group contradicted the second group. They cancel each other out. Therefore, the Hazama is nothing. No. Hachasha Tchilas Hazama, and therefore they get the punishment of Hazama. Amar Abaye on the last line of Ayin Gimel and Beis, Abaye comes along and says, "Loi, that's not the case. The case is Dabachenu. The case is that they switched around their eidos of Azminu and they made them into Zaymimin, meaning Group A and Group B just clash. But they clash in a mannerism that A said it was first a knocking out the eye and then knocking out the tooth. B said they happened in the reverse. And then B said, and you weren't there. So the Hazama happens at the same time as the Hachasha, and therefore says Abaye, there's no Raya. The whole Raya was if there's three groups of Eidim, and then you have Hachasha followed by Hazama, and then you have to say the Hazama is the end of the Hachasha process. Says Abaye, no. The case over here is there are only two groups of Eidim, and within their clash is where they also made them to be Eidim Zaymimin. And therefore we have no raya to the din of Rava of Eidim Shochshub Saifozmo Hachashat Chilas Hazama. Says the Gemara Mimai. Where do we know this to be the case? How does Abaye know that this is the way to learn the brisa? Mid is Seifa. As we turn over to Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, explains Abaye. We know this from the Seifa. Says the Gemara Meip be mid Seifa be Meipach Lazama. From the fact that the Seifa of that brisa is discussing a case where the Meipach, they switched around the Eidos only with two Eidim and then were found to be Hazama, says Abaye, I'll tell you that the same thing is in the Reisha. Tikatani Seifa, the end of the brisa says, we give eidos that this person knocked out the tooth of his eved, or he blinded his eye. Shari Eved Omer King, because Eved said such. They're found to be Eidim Zaymin, so therefore they have to pay that which the master paid, which is the value of the eye. So says the Gemara, hey Chidami, what is this case in the Seifa? If the case is that the latter witnesses who said that the first one were Zaymimim did not as well agree with the original Eidim, Bechavala Klal, did not agree at all with regard to the Chavala, meaning didn't agree that the master actually damaged the Eved. They just said, Imanu Ayisem Klal to make Kuli Eved. The Rabbi L'Shlume. You have to pay the whole value of the Eved. Elabshita, what is the case? Tkamaida Kulu Bechavala. They agreed, like the first set of Eidim said, that yes, there was a knocking out the tooth, yes, there was a knocking out the eye. And the case is that they switched around the Eduyais and they made them into be Hazama. And that's where Abaye learned that the Reisha is talking about the same case. And there's only two eidim. It has nothing to do with achasha tchilas hazama. Says the Gemara 10 lines down. The first one line is avchenu vehechi dami. Continues the Gemara saying, let's explain the brisa a bit deeper according to Abaya. If what's going on over here, that the last set of eidim have a later date to when everything happened. If it was at a later date that the original eidim said, then the eidim should have to pay the full value of the Eved. Why? What's the reason? Because they made the Gavra, the original Rav, the master, chayiv to free his Eved. Akati Gavra lavar chiyuvahu. He didn't really have to do that. And therefore, you're really making the master lose his Eved unlawfully. Therefore, you have to compensate him. What's the kasher zamam? What do you have to give him? You have to give what you tried to do. You got to give a full value of the Eved. So, Ella, rather, what are you going to explain? To come mikadmi kadumi. That the latter Eidim said an earlier date. An earlier date is when everything happened. And therefore, all you have to pay is the May Ayin Le Rabbi. Ask Hani Basrai, ask the Gemara 1 second, but if that's true, there was ever a Hamada din, you have the same problem. And that's the way that Abaye is going to have to explain the Brisa. Abaye is going to explain the Seifa, mirroring the case of the Reisha, like Abaye wanted to say, that what's going on over here is there's not three groups of Eidim, there's two groups of Eidim, and they just were machesh, they contradict, and then were mazim, the other groups. Says the Gemara, Omar le Ravacha Breid Ravika le Ravashi Diyuka de Rava Mehecha. Going back on the way that Rava learned the case, Rava learned that there's three groups of Eidim. Rava learned from this Brisa, we have a raya to the fact of Hazama, Achashat Chilz Hazama. Says Ravacha Breid Ravika le Ravashi Ilema Mi Reisha. If Rava sees this in the Reisha Mika Mechashi B'Tiyasa, in the Reisha, do we find that the middle group contradicted the original group? Kivan Dechi, Kivan De'iloi Mizami, Sa'adusa Kavasayu Kakaimi. If they were not found to be Zaimimim, Sa'adusa Kavasayu Kakaimi, the Eidos would have been like them. So the fact that the second contradicted the first is almost inconsequential, if not for the latter Hazamha. Tedina Kavasayu Baskinon. Tiesh Bechama Sayimana. Because they're agreeing ostensibly. They're agreeing theoretically to the original Eidim. They're saying there was more. So if not for the fact that there was Hazamha afterwards, it would be irrelevant. Therefore, it really is the first Eidim whose Eidos was contradicted. The second set of Eidim was not really contradicted at all. And therefore, what's Rava's Raya at all if the latter Eidim are just adding on to the original Eidim? This is not a case of Hachashat Chilas Hazama. Says the Gemara, you're right. Therefore, the Gemara has another way that Rava is going to darshan from this brisa to prove his point that Achashat Chilas Hazama. 15 lines to the bottom. First line is Mizchashi Midi. Amar le Rava. Amar le, excuse me. So says Ravashi, you're right. Rava Sava, Rava held. Midaresha b'shalosh kita sevenami b'shalahish. So Rava is now saying the flip of Abaye. Abaye said from the Seifa's two kita, he's contradicting and flipping. The Reisha is the same. Says Rava, no. The Reisha's three groups, the Seifa's also three groups. V'dayik mi Seifa. And the Raya that Achashat Chilas Hazama is not even from the Reisha. It's from the Seifa. Kigoyin. What's the case? Asu Beichei V'amri Hippalesh Einai. V'sima Einai. Ubaskuna Ledina. Abu Mayu, and they made a psak, didn't base that which he said that he blinded him. He knocked at his tooth. Then Vasu Beitrei Achrin of Amri Sima Einai. V'hipalesh Einai. That it was the opposite. He first knocked at his tooth, and that first knocked at his eye, and then knocked at his tooth. He contradicted the first ones. And then, Kamai, the ritual is about to be Zaimim. Misham to me, I in the Rav. And this is Rava's Raya, that if you're going to tell me that Achash is not the Tchilas Hazamahi, then Amai, Mishalmi, why are you paying Achshishalum Ekar? They were originally Hachash and only later to be a Zama. Elashmamina says Rava Achasha Tchilas Hazamahi. And that's how Rava is going to bring a Raya that Achasha really is the beginning of Hazama. Now, after explaining how a Rava learns the Raya, Rava now, the Raya just switched, just to keep track. We started with saying that which really was yesterday's Gemara. Rava holds there's 3 groups of Eidim. Abaye responded, no, there's 2 groups of Eidim. Within proving Abaye, the Gemara wanted Rava's response. The Gemara didn't understand how Rava learned the Reisha. Rather, the Gemara said, you're right, Rava has to swap. And Rava says that there's 3 groups of Eidim, but he's learning it from the Seifa. And in the Seifas where Rava could prove Achasha Tchilas Hazama. So now, the Gemara in the classical game of ping pong throws the ball back. And how does Abaye now learn? Abaye Amar Lacha, 5 lines from the bottom says Abaye, Bishlam, I understand, Reisha, Lo Sagid Lo Shalosh Kitais. I understand in the first case of the Braisa, it's not enough to say that there's 3 Kitai Sharei Kotani Harav Aimerkin. Because in the Reisha it said, and the master agreed. Ela Seifa Lamali Shalosh Kitais Sharei Eved Aimerkin. Where did you get in the Seifa that there's 3 Kitais? Because it said in the Seifa that the Eved concurred. Eved called to Amar. Amar. What do you mean? The Eved is just going to agree because Eved wants to make the cash. Is even more. Because Eved just wants to go free. And therefore, says the Gemara, says Abaye, that's why he disagrees within the way that Rava learns the Raya. Continues the Gemara, Maskif la Rav Zira. Asks Rav Zira, Ema, asks Rav Zira, let us say, Sima es Einai. Let us say that if the master did indeed blind the Eved, and we turn over to Ayin Dalet Amud Beis, Nefak Bayin. Then what? Then the Eved goes free with the fact that his eye was knocked out. Nefak Bayin. Hipel Sheinai. If the master knocked out his tooth, then what? Nefak B'Shinai. Then the Eved should go free on the fact that he lost a tooth. Sima es einai, v'shibel es shinai, nefak be'einai, v'shinai. So as Rav Zira, I don't really understand what's going on over here. As the Tab Rashi points out, ulaylam demei lo nasivle. Whichever way you twist it, whether there was an eye knocked out, whether there was a tooth knocked out, in both scenarios, in all scenarios, this equals that the Eved should go free. So why would there be any payments in such a scenario? And if the Eved's going free, what's happening is that there should be payments of Demei Kulai. So ask the Gemara, answers the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Alecha Amar Kra, Tachas Einoi, V'lo Tachas Einoi V'shinoi. Tachas Shinoi, V'lo Tachas Shinoi V'einoi. Says Abaye, I'm sorry. The Gzeres HaKosav is that the Eved goes free for losing a eye, for losing a tooth, but not for losing both. And once we're on the topic, the Gemara, the classical Gemara sense takes a little bit of a left turn. 5 lines down, Amar Rav Idi Baravin Afanana Mitanina learned the same in a Braisa. Ganav al Bishnayim v'Tavach u'Machar al Biyam. V'Nimsu Zayim v'Shalmis, I call you pay for everything. My love, what's the case? Ta'idu ala Geneva v'Chazar v'idu ala Tvicha. Excuse me, when I apologize. Not a left turn. Going back around, circling back around, and proving Rava. Nachamal, one more time, apologies. Again, my love, the Yidu Ali Geneva, They first gave edus on the stealing, then on the slaughtering. They found to be hazam on the geneva. What's the kasha? And this should hopefully sound familiar. And there's no edus on the tvicha because they already were thrown out. Tchilas Azami, Ravida Baravin, bringing a raya seemingly exactly like Rava. But Amri, the Gemara responds to the raya of Ravida Baravin, Achamayaskinan. No, that what's going on over here is they found to be Zaymim on the Tvicha first, and only afterwards they found to be Zaymim on the Geneva. Ube Plukta, and says the Gemara, Ube Plukta, and the Machlekes Abayin Rava is in fact a machlekes tanayim. So after we tried to spend a long time showing it's not a machlekes tanayim, says the Gemara lemaisa plukta edim shachshul b'sayf hozmu Rav Yechran v'Rav Elazar chad amar neheragin v'chad amar ein neheragin. So it's indeed a machlekes. Tistayim the Rav Elazar udam ein neheragin amar Rav Elazar edim shachshul b'nefesh loikin. V'yisach that Rav Elazar udam ein neheragin am I loikin why getting malchus? Havle lashin nitik las harzbi says bezdin. Anytime you have a lav that potentially gets bezdin, potentially get warning in bezdin, doesn't it have malchus? Chalav shinin las harzbi is in bezdin. Ein loikin a lav. El lav proves the Gemara shma mina. Rav Elazar udam ein neheragim tistayim. It's a raya. It's a shita Rav Elazar. Says the Gemara, just proving this last detail. Loikin treu treininu. Why is there malchus bechlau? You have a contradiction of 2 and 2. The case is not that it's a trey, that the person that they gave edus that he was killed walked into Bezdin. He is here, as Rashi says, the one that they said, Allah shunerag ba chai beraglav lefanenu, the first more than in case of trey. And that's the reason why in this case there would be malchus. So an interesting Gemara form, after trying to prove so difficultly that it's not a precedented earlier machlekes tanayim, the Gemara concludes that it indeed is a machlekes Rav Elazar and Rav Yechanan. We continue with the Mishnah on the bottom quarter of Ayin Dalim Beis. Ganav al pi shnayim. If someone stole and there were 2 edim that testified to the point, v'tavachu macher al pi eid echad. There's only an eid echad saying that he slaughtered or sold it. Oy al pi atzmi, or he admitted it. What's the halacha? B'shat shul kefel ve'enoi mishalim dalad vei. Case 2 in the Mishnah. Ganav v'tavach b'Shabbos, or ganav v'tavach levad zara. Ganav mishal aviv u'meisaviv achar tavach u'machar. Ganav, he stole it viktish and he was maktish v'achar tavach u'machar. Mishalim tashul kefel, and again ve'enoi mishalim tashul dalad hey. Of course, for different reasons, as we'll see in the Gemara. Kodshim, in which the one that stole it is obligated in it, you are going to be potter. So you begin the Gemara dealing with the first part of the Mishnah, which is the case of Eid Echad. Al pi Eid Echad, says the Gemara, Pshita, of course there's no payment of Dalad V'Hei. Amri akamashlan al pi atzmai dumyad al pi Eid Echad. Ma al pi Eid Echad ki asa Eid Echad mitzaref behadei mechayif. Al pi atzmai nami koso eidim mechayiv. That just like if there's one aid and then another aid comes along, the two are mitzaref, so too another aid can be mitzaref to the haidah of the Baal, of the person himself. Lafukim and Rav Huna Amarav, Tam Rav Huna Amarav, Maida bekenas, v'achach ba'edim potter, a larger sugya, but not for here. But says the Gemara from our Mishnah, will have a raya not like Rav Huna, as in the case of the Mishnah, the Eidah will be similar to the Eid Echad, just like in Eid Echad, another Eid will come and be Mitzaref, similar to the Eidah, not like Rav Huna who says, Madav Knasa, then Eidim Kim will be Potter. We'll pick it up from the 2 dots from Gufa in the next year of Siyata Vishmaya.